What's happening, everybody? Off the Mic Sports Network here, another edition of Off the Top Rope. I haven't done a lot of Dynamite stuff because let's be real, last week was kind of fine. Nothing really to yell and scream about because, usually on these themed episodes, specifically for like Halloween, they seem to have more, more direction, more, gusto with them. And, hey, they delivered on a number one contender. They had some interesting stuff coming in. And so now we get to and then I talked about over the weekend, the women's, blood and guts match, but I really haven't talked specifically about Dynamite in a couple of weeks. Tonight was weird. Tonight was weird. And one of the main talking points that I want to talk about isn't even really something that happened on the show. There was stuff that fed into it on the show, but I guess Tony Khan did a couple of live streams on social media, and in the midst of all of this, he announced another championship. Yes, another championship. The AEW National Championship, not the International Championship, not the Continental Championship, not the Intercontinental Championship, none of that. The National Championship. The AEW National Championship, which I guess is going to have lineage to a bunch of the territories. They can defend it everywhere else. And I'd be like, and if there was some sort of rhyme or reason to it, I would have been like, cool. Here's the problem and why I absolutely hate this idea. And it shows the latest example of how Tony Khan has completely lost the plot and has no vision, no creative focus, no foresight, nothing to, convince me that he is willing to drive home a good story and needs championships to get it done. This is all going on, but because this happens as you're literally conducting a tournament to announce the first, to crown the first ever women's tag team champions. So, man, that puts a damper on that, right? You're about to go into blood and guts, 2 cage matches with, there's one that's 5-on-5. There's one that's 6-on-6. So you basically have 22 people in cage matches next week. And in the midst of all of it, you're announcing another championship because you have no other story to, formulate. So I hate it from the perspective of, it takes away from, the women's tag team tournament, but also it completely bastardizes any other form of championship that they've done. Because think about where we were. Think about where we were about 18 or so months ago, almost back all the way back in March of last year. You guys remember? Well, actually, we could almost go back 2 full years. AEW had a tournament, the Continental Classic, that crowned Eddie Kingston the Continental Crown Champion. They created a new championship for him. 3 months after that, after he won that, he lost it to Kazuchika Okada in really unceremonious fashion. Kazuchika Okada went on to, hold that championship all the way through the year, win the Continental Classic again, just so he could set up a match with Kenny Omega, because Tony Khan is a mark for Japanese pro wrestling, and the greatest match ever, he wanted to have that in his company on American soil at All In Texas in July of this year. So Kenny Omega comes back at World's End after that Continental Classic. Kenny Omega ends up beating Konosuke Takeshita for that championship. And it all leads to All In Texas Globe Life Field, where they just unify the titles, which was the international title, which was supposed to be which was initially the All Atlantic Championship and was supposed to be the one defended in territories. And then you had the Continental Championship, which I don't even know what the fuck that is. They call it the Unified Championship, seemingly to get rid of the titles, even though Okada's still carrying around the titles. And then here we are, 4 months later? Just about a little under 4 months later, and we're already creating a new championship. If that doesn't tell you how creatively inept or how off the cuff and just, how Tony Khan is winging this shit, I don't even know what to tell you at this point. It could be great wrestling, but what this also tells me is the rest of his mid-card, because you already know who the established people are, but also they're if you're not in the world title picture, then you're in purgatory. So Tony is kind of using this as a vehicle to make people look important because they have a title. And that's not how it should work. You should be fighting for prizes because the prize is only as good as the chase. And if you have so many titles in your company, you're going to just devalue every other championship because everybody's what's even important to fight for. That's the issue that I have with this. And then on top of it, you're in the middle of a tournament with 2 more titles that you're trying to crown with the women. So if I'm a woman in this company, damn, you couldn't even let us get the shine, and now you're just going to give another championship. Oh, by the way, they're doing another casino gauntlet match, which they've bastardized that stipulation because Tony's got nothing else to grasp to. So even before Dynamite, and Dynamite wasn't terrible tonight, there were some questionable things. It wasn't as bad as it's been for most of the year, but right out of the gate, you're setting a tone where you're like, okay, if I'm Takeshita going after Okada, if I'm Okada, if I'm Hangman Adam Page, if I'm Kyle Fletcher, if I'm Mercedes and Tony, like they had their own exclusive club because they seem to be but if I'm any of these other champions in this company, what the fuck am I supposed to think when you're just creating a new title? And if I'm just a wrestler, like let's say I'm a Ricochet, even though I don't give a shit about him, what's the title supposed to mean? Because that's where this is going. Because they're creating a championship because they have no other way to create a story. Because, Hurt Syndicate's kind of in purgatory a little bit because they've been phased out in whatever they are. The Don Callis family, so they could, use that as a vehicle to start a feud or something. They can't have any form of original storytelling, so they need to attach a championship to it to just make somebody look relevant. That is the worst indication that you can have that you don't that somebody doesn't know what they're doing. Like even Vince McMahon, as much as I don't like the man and I didn't like the way he conducted things, he did not create championships to make people relevant. Maybe that was one of the reasons why nobody was over near that wasn't the reason why a lot of people weren't over near the end, is because you know what he did? He put the championships on his top guys and consolidated everything. That's what happened. But you don't need this many championships to make everybody in your company feel special. In fact, I think it's counterproductive. I think it makes everybody feel like just normal. Like the world champion should feel like the world championship should feel like the most important prize in that place. But now you've got unified championship, TNT championship. You're going to have I'm losing track. ROH, like you got all these other titles, and now you're just going to bring in the national championship. It's like, what am I supposed to think? And this is just after you took away, you unified 2 titles. My goodness, man. Again, like I said, Dynamite wasn't bad. But this was more par for the course, just more brain dead booking. I don't understand it. I really don't. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.